Today we're heading into Kahurangi National Park, hiking up to a unique upland landscape. Let's talk about the Thousand Acre Plateau. Kia ora and welcome to The Tramping Life, a podcast about hiking in Aotearoa, New Zealand, or as we call it here, tramping. I'm Chauncey, and in this episode I'll talk about a specific track or hut. I'll give an overview and share my experience, along with the highlights and some practical advice. Thousand Acre Plateau is a vast open expanse of tussock and limestone that originally was the bed of a shallow sea, since raised to around 1,000 metres above sea level. The plateau is actually about 2,000 acres in size and was named by Murchison settlers, some of whom grazed their sheep here in the early 20th century. It is located in the northwest of Kahurangi National Park and most easily accessed from Matiri Valley Road, about half an hour's drive from Murchison. Tramp starts along a four-wheel drive track developed for a hydro scheme before heading through mature beech forest to the 8-bunk Lake Matiri Hut. This overlooks Lake Matiri, which is an important wildlife refuge. Flocks of paradise ducks rest there during the summer when they molt and they cannot fly. Little shag, mallard, scallop and grave ducks are also common visitors. From here is a steep climb of around 750 metres to emerge onto the plateau rim. A marked route crosses the tussock and boggy plateau to the two-bunk Poor Pete's Hut before continuing north to the four-bunk Larrikin Creek Hut, which sits beneath limestone bluffs near the Haystack. Both huts have a good number of camping spots nearby. Larrikin Creek Hut is a good base for day trips to the nearby mudstone peaks of the Needle and the Haystack, which involves some scrambling to reach the summits. To reach 100 Acre Plateau itself, climb a bushy gully to the north of the hut to a tussock basin with tarns. At the western rim is the small peak of Mount Misery. Return the way you came, or there are more challenging options to create a loop route for experienced trampers. I hiked 1,000 Acre Plateau in January a few years ago, over 3 days, walking around 44 kilometres. A hydroelectric power scheme was being built in the valley and a four-wheel drive access road made for dull but fast walking. It didn't take much more than an hour to reach the attractively situated Lake Matiri Hut. The outside bench, though, could have done with being placed 6 feet closer to the hut to really enjoy the lake views. The sandflies were pretty thick here, and black swans below could be heard honking away. The lake is nearby, but there wasn't an obvious way to reach the shore. The next morning started with a pleasant walk to reach a junction, heading to the right for the Wangapeka track via the Matiri Valley track, and left up to Thousand Acre Plateau. And up it certainly was, with a 750 metre climb, very steep at the start and end, and more gradual in the middle sections. There were plenty of tree roots, a weka, moss, fantails, and a handful of views along the way. A few hours later, it was quite a sight coming out onto the plateau, nearly 1,000 metres above sea level, with an epic expanse of tussock and some interesting formations in the distance. The pointiest of these, the Needle, was the goal to reach by what would be a rather long day. It was up and over a tussock-covered hill to reach Poor Pete's Hut for lunch. This is a tidy two-bunk hut, though with 3 mattresses, and it has a nice camping area, large enough for a couple of tents, which we would stay at on our return. From here it was a long, hot afternoon crossing the plateau under the full force of the summer sun with little shade. The views were quite spectacular, though. It had been unusually dry for several weeks, so many of the tarns had completely dried out, but a few photogenic ones remain. After a few hours of undulating terrain in the heat, it was a relief to reach a section of bush that was pretty muddy even in this dry period. We reached the four-bunk Larrikin Creek Hut by the end of the afternoon. There, an enthusiastic couple told us of a campsite by the tarns below the Needle, so we headed up another hillside. We were rewarded, though, with magnificent views and a number of tarns. We camped on a gravelly area a little way away on a warm and near windless summer's evening. The morning brought new views of the landscape and a totally blue sky day. Stunning, but very hot, and there was almost no shade around. After breakfast, we headed up towards the Needle. This is a steep climb, however you do it. We went up a bushy section to the left of the gully, while people who came after us went straight up the dry creek bed, which is even steeper and riskier in my view, if quicker and easier in some ways. My theory is to avoid situations with potentially large falls, particularly where the rock is prone to breaking, which this would in your hand. The views were huge and got even better the higher we climbed, and there were many colourful flowers around, along with some very spiky plants, which made me regret not wearing my gaiters for this section. Reaching a saddle below the Needle, we could see Mount Misery at the edge of the plateau. It would have been a great place to visit had we more time, but we needed to retrace our steps that afternoon across the plateau. The Needle gets progressively steeper towards the summit, So we got as close, about 20 metres from it, as I felt comfortable, enjoyed the views, and then returned much faster down the hill back to the campsite for lunch. It was all blue skies and impressive scenery on the return down the hill to Larrikin Creek Hut. Not far beyond the hut is one of the larger and more sheltered creeks, which had just enough water in it to make an excellent place for a quick dip to cool down, about 20 metres beyond where the track crosses it. This was very much needed before a long, very hot afternoon returning across the plateau to camp at Poor Pete's hut. My wife was close to heat stroke, an experience also shared by former Minister of Conservation Eugenie Sage whilst walking this track. There we had dinner with Hans and Diane, the Kiwi couple who gave us the camping advice at Larrikin Creek Hut. They had plenty of adventures and were impressively fit for their age after hiking on average 5 days a week for the past 15 months all around New Zealand. They were quite inspirational and things you could do in your early retirement. The next morning we headed down to Lake Matiri Hut. Slow work at the start due to the steepness, faster in the middle and quite painful on the knees on the final long steep section. We thought the final stretch along the four-wheel drive track would be easy, but it was more uphill than remembered and offered very little shade from the scorching sun. It was a relief to return to the car and have a dip in the Matiri River close to the car park. In usual conditions, I suspect this would be a bad idea given strong currents, but in low flow it was warm and very refreshing. Highlights of this tramp include the landscape of the Thousand Acre Plateau, which is unique in New Zealand. It is a broad, open tussock landscape with expansive views and dramatic limestone features, markedly different from forested valleys and typical alpine scenery. Landmarks such as the Haystack and the Needle are distinctive and make for good day trips. Granted, I walked this during COVID times, but we still only saw 9 people in 3 parties over a beautiful weekend at the end of January. So this is relatively quiet compared to many tracks. There are many attractive tarns, and there would have been more so if it hadn't been so dry. And much of the route passes through mature beech forest, and there was a reasonable amount of wildlife around. To finish with some practical advice, take a tent. The huts are good, but small and cannot be booked. There are decent camping spots next to each, and camping by the tarn above Larrikin Hut was memorable. Access is via the Matiri Valley Road, which is largely gravel, but accessible without a four-wheel drive. Lake Matiri Hut is easy to reach, the plateau less so, with decent climb and steep terrain requiring suitable fitness. Heatstroke is a risk to be aware of if walking in summer due to the lack of shade. On the plateau, you'll largely be exposed to whatever the weather is doing, so do pay attention to the forecast before starting. Parts of the walk can be extremely boggy. The mud here is notorious. In wet weather, streams can be challenging to cross. Come prepared, gaiters are recommended. Parts of this tramp are more of a route than a track, so some navigational skills are needed. And finally, allow more time than you think. This is not a fast nor an easy tramp, but it does make for a wonderful few days. Thank you so much for listening to The Tramping Life. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast in whatever app you use. Tell a friend about it and consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at thetrampinglife, one word, @gmail.com.